course, we've been talking a lot about guns and terrorism and what's been going on in Congress with a debate over guns and terrorism. And joining us to discuss that debate and an amendment that he has offered up is U.S. Senator John Cornyn. Senator Cornyn, welcome back to the show. How are you today?
Good morning, Chad. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Let's talk about this a little bit. After the terrorist attack in Orlando, this talk of putting out a no-buy list really heated up again. You had Democrats who held a filibuster on the floor. There were discussions going on behind the scenes about what to do. You have come up with a solution that you've touted before, but you're putting out again, correct?
Yes, this is unfortunately in the wake of the Orlando shooting, which of course we all acknowledge is a terrible tragedy. We've really come together, I think, as a country and said, we don't want terrorists to get guns, but this has to be done in a constitutional way. And the proposal that Senator Feinstein and Senate Democrats have floated out is that if your name appears on a secret list, that you can be denied your Second Amendment rights. This isn't like getting on an airplane. That's not a constitutional right. This is pretty serious stuff. What I've said is the better alternative is for the FBI and local law enforcement to be notified immediately, and then they have a 72-hour period where they can decide, well, do we want to go to court and show probable cause to get a wiretap? Do we want to learn more about the purpose for which this individual is purchasing the firearm? But we have to do it. They have to do it with the judge, and they have to do it in a constitutional way, consistent with the Fourth Amendment right to privacy, and show probable cause. But if what they decide is, in the end, is that this person is dangerous, then they need to be able to arrest him. Under the Democratic alternative, they're denied the opportunity to buy a firearm, but there's no further action taken by law enforcement. So I think this is a reasonable position to take. It keeps guns out of the hands of terrorists, but it also forces the government to come forward and be able to prove this to a judge rather than just on the Loretta Lynch's say-so.
This is called the SHIELD Act that you have proposed. Let's go to the Orlando terrorist. If the Democrats had their way, because they're the ones who have been really, they took to the floor to do this filibuster. Dianne Feinstein, she wants this list that is different than what you have proposed. Mm-hmm. Would this shooter have been on the list that she has brought up, or would he have been on your list that you are proposing?
He had been investigated twice and had been placed on a watch list but removed after the investigation by the FBI was inconclusive. Under my provision, if you've been on a watch list for the preceding 5 years, law enforcement, the FBI, state and local law enforcement, would be immediately notified. And they could decide whether a further investigation is warranted and decide what appropriate action they need to take in court. But not on their list. The only provision was they would be denied access to their firearm, but further no escalation of the investigation. And I believe ours has a better chance of getting terrorists off the streets, in addition to keeping guns out of their hands, but only in accordance with due process of law and our Constitution.
There was a report that the FBI director had previously testified that a no-sell list, if that is out there, would actually hurt FBI investigations, that it could blow, quote, blow investigations. The Department of Justice yesterday came out and said, no, that's not true. We are for a list of some kind. Are you worried about that? Have you talked with the FBI about your list, and how would they feel your list compared to what the Democrats are proposing?
Well, the FBI Director Comey has testified publicly about that previously. He reiterated it this last week. And Loretta Lynch, I guess, is towing the administration line and sort of trying to overrule him. But the fact is, as Director Comey said, it may be some circumstances in a counterterrorism investigation where the FBI would want the sale to go through, but would want to be notified and then follow this and follow the purchaser and also escalate the investigation. As you know, they could go pursue any number of investigative tools, including search warrants, including wiretaps. That requires a showing of probable cause in front of the court. There's no presumption of guilt. There's still a presumption of innocence, but it would allow the government to follow the evidence no matter where it leads.
We're visiting with U.S. Senator John Cornyn, who has introduced the SHIELD Act, that would legislation that would stop terrorists from buying guns, also while protecting the Second Amendment. I had a few callers and listeners who have asked this question: who's in charge of this list? Because we've heard from some in the Department of Homeland Security that say, some of those right wingers out there, you can't really trust them, and they're just as dangerous as Islamic terrorists. So, who's going to be on this list, and who's going to be in charge of this list?
Well, there are multiple lists. All of the FBI and our intelligence agencies add names to the list. We know that there's some famous mistakes that have been made. The former Senator Teddy Kennedy was on the no-fly list at one point,
right?
Because they confused him with a Irish Republican Army, IRA terrorist. So that's why it's so important that we don't have secret lists that deny people their constitutional rights, that it requires the government to come forward and to prove in a court of law that there is probable cause. And we also need to make sure that the FBI and others are notified so they can escalate their investigation if it's warranted. This presumption of guilt and this secret lists and denying people their constitutional rights is really un-American. And, I have to ask, if you can be denied your constitutional rights based on no evidence and no showing of due process under the law, what other constitutional rights does the administration believe can be denied? It's a scary thought.
Let me ask you this, and we only have a couple of minutes left. I want to put a scenario out there that, maybe a real scenario, may not be, and see if it qualifies for this list that you have proposed. Let's say you have very conservative guys who own a bunch of guns. They have a blog online where they rail against the government. They don't like the Obama administration. They don't like Democrats. They don't like liberals. They're tired of all of this. They rail against the government on Twitter, on Facebook, on social media. And somebody finds that threatening. Would they be added to this type of list?
Well, unfortunately, Chad, these lists, or I should say, the fact is these lists are classified, so we will never know. But that's the danger of putting people on secret lists for exercising their First Amendment rights of free speech and political association. Now, obviously, there's a line that could be crossed here where people would then be flagged as potentially dangerous or warranting further investigation. But we don't leave all these decisions up to the administration and the government. That's why it's so important to have due process and to require the government to come before a judge, an impartial third party, and present actual evidence. That's what our Constitution provides, but that's what is denied under the Feinstein proposal.
Do you think that the SHIELD Act that you're proposing, the act that or the legislation that Dianne Feinstein is proposing, will any of this put a dent in terrorist attacks here in this country?
Well, that's certainly the intent behind my SHIELD Act, and I do believe that it would provide law enforcement with additional information that they don't currently have and that they certainly wouldn't get under the Feinstein proposal. All of us are interested in finding a solution. Well, I should say most of us are. Some, unfortunately, are politicizing this in an effort to pursue their anti-Second Amendment agenda. And that's a lot of the rhetoric we saw on the floor of the Senate this last week. I would note that Glenn Kessler, who does the fact-checking for the Washington Post, has given Senator Chris Murphy, who was the main filibusterer, 3 Pinocchios for some of the false claims that he made during the course of that filibuster. So that's worth checking out.
Visiting with Senator Cornyn, just have about a minute or so left. Real quickly, when do you expect this to be debated on the floor? And then do you anticipate legislation being thrown out anytime soon that would go after assault-style or assault-looking or scary-looking rifles?
Well, I do think that that's certainly happened in the past, legislating based on how guns look, not on what they actually do.
Right.
I don't know whether the Democrats will go there this time or not, but we'll be voting on these amendments that we're discussing now on Monday afternoon in the Senate when we return to business. What I'd like to see us do is to pivot to the real problem here, and that is the failed strategy to crush ISIS. That's the instigator of this ideology and the radicalization of people like Mateen here in the United States, together with giving the FBI more legitimate investigatory tools consistent with the Fourth Amendment and the requirement of a probable cause, but to give them more investigative tools so they can identify these people before they kill. That's what I would hope we would pivot to.
Senator Cornyn, always appreciate your time.
Thank you, Chad.
Have a good one. That's U.S. Senator John Cornyn on the Chad Hasty Show.